in defense, this presentation is in defense of the theory of Jimmy Kimmel on the Charlie Kirk shooting, understood in the following way. So it may be wrong, but that's the way I understand it, is the following. What Kimmel said is Trump and all the right are blaming the killing on the radical left and on Antifa, which has been declared a domestic terrorist organization, and accordingly people connected to it are being looked up with respect to what kind of connections they have, and various post 9/11 ideological state apparatuses have been flipped on. But what Kimmel suggests is maybe it wasn't a radical, maybe Robinson's the killers. It's unfortunate the way the media is compelled by, through the fear of being sued, to all the time speak of the suspect or the alleged, to use some qualified phrase rather than just say the killer when it's actually on inspections for everyone on the video, and when everybody actually knows it's a killer. And you all the time have to hear the suspect or whatever they say. He seemed to suggest the following, that it could be that the fountains that Robinson was drinking from and his whole upbringing, so apparently his family were MAGA, his parents were MAGA, and from Ohio, which is a red state, we couldn't say straightforwardly the whole of Ohio is MAGA, but at the same time, the Republicans basically say if you're not MAGA, you're no longer a Republican, pretty much. So in a way, he's from a MAGA state. Although I accept that there could be a distinction made in some way between MAGA and the other, and the Republican Party at large, and at rightism at large, or writ large. But, so I think what's interesting is to read a transcendental passion into this situation, so something beyond life and death. And so then let's superimpose the situation in Russian Dostoevsky's time in the end of the 19th century, when Nechaev, or Sergei Nechaev, or Nechaev, inspired Dostoevsky to his book Bezi, or Demons, usually translated, and actually I always mention this whenever this comes up, as Dugan himself has said, the Constant Garnet translation, old translation, The Possessed, is perfectly sensible. It makes a lot of sense, because that's what the theme of the book is, even though it's not the literal translation of Bezi. So what's the analogy I'm trying to make is that Dostoevsky pictures then ultimately his most supreme Russian. So he's thinking of Pushkin. He's thinking of the literary creation, and that, the Harold Bloom sense of the character of the Russians. And he produces his Alyosha later on this model in the Brothers Karamazov. But already you could see that he points, if Nechaev is supposed to be extravagant, this is really an extremely extravagant and flattering picture of Stravigan, who Dostoevsky was apparently, as a conservative, repulsed by and disgusted by, and in a certain way all his output has been meant to be an indictment of this horrible tendency within the Russians that Dostoevsky prophesized, as it were, and which did come about and bring about the Soviet Union. But so the point I'm making is, it doesn't follow that because Robinson has killed Kirk, that Robinson wasn't himself a part of MAGA. Just like it doesn't follow that because Nechaev or Alyosha, to make it more clear, was totally Russian. From Dostoevsky's point of view, like the most Russian, in a way, the most idealized transcendental version of the Russian spirit. That he couldn't kill his own. So that so from the point of view of Platonic analysis, it runs like this. There's something called a polis, but the polises don't exist anymore. We have countries. But there's something called a country, and then there's something else called the politeia, or often translated as the regime, and that could be, we could graft onto Tsarist Russia is one regime, USSR is another regime, Russian Federation is a third regime, but underlying it always is the Russians. So, right, and then in the same way, we could understand Kimmel to be saying, yeah, look, the Trump and MAGA are trying to say this came from the left, but no, it came from inside. It came from MAGA. It's an attempt to bring into a different regime within MAGA. So I think that's a worthy thesis, and one can see. No, I'm not saying it's necessarily true, but I can the straightforward evidence already stated the family and Ohio in general. But there's also seems to be further evidence in his online behavior. So you could say, so first of all, transvestitism happens also with the right wing, and there's all kinds of homosexual within MAGA itself, but they just have a different tact towards it. So that doesn't exclude it outright either. Even if somebody like Steve Bannon, who, when he's faced with the close relationship between Epstein and Trump, immediately says, "Oh, no, Trump has no homosexual tendencies," or whatever. Of course, that's the way they talk, but that doesn't mean de facto it's not the case that this kind of online culture that Robinson was involved in couldn't be MAGA, couldn't be totally right wing. It might be. So I think, and then also I've heard it said that a lot of the sources he was going on, and also probably some of the references he made in his bullets or whatever, have to do both with video games and other online things, some of which were frequented by a lot of Kirk people, and that's how we so much in contact with him. So I think that furthers the notion too. So here we could have simply somebody who, from within MAGA, has had a metamorphosis, but still is in a way MAGA in this sense of the primordial political problem. I mean, that's in Plato, the primordial political problem is basically you love the country, so you love Athens, but there's this switch where the democratic Athens comes in, and then they want to kill Socrates, and then you might be against the current regime, and you might have to, if you're Aristotle wasn't a native-born Athenian, but in any case, you might have to be faced with the question of fleeing when the wrong regime is in, but then you might come back. So maybe his country is, maybe his basic DOS sign is sort of a right-wing conservative DOS sign, but it's refusing the current MAGA regime, but not the whole rightist liberal thing, which I mean, I say rightist liberal, which sounds confusing, but I just mean since the French Revolution, since the notion of free speech, the notion of rights of people came in, which are both shared by the public pronouncements of both what we now call liberals and conservatives, or progressives and right-wing people in left and right-wing in American politics. They're both on the same underlying unity in terms of this so-called classical liberalism. But nonetheless, if the right wing is then decoupled itself, maybe that's what's really happening. So if the right wing is totally decoupled itself, as people are saying, from the constantly harping on the notion of right and left wing is de trop, or it's somehow worn out. If this new thing has happened, maybe he's still part of that new thing, and therefore Kimmel would have a point in saying they're trying to point it, stick it onto the left wing, but actually he's a new force that's showing up from within MAGA.